let me know. Great.
Yes, it'll be paused until it starts.
Yourself for the moment. I am going to call the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order at 7:03 p.m. We have regular members James Laporta, Christine Gray, and Anna Tamel, the chair. And then we have alternates Michelle Shipp, Bruce Bennett, and Will Evans. Oh, I forgot.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Keith. I forgot regular member Keith.
Thank you.
We need to put a sticky note on your telephone with your face. I'm going to seat Will Evans for Phil West. I'm going to seat Michelle Shipp for Stephen Sicardi. And I think that takes care of the attendance for the evening. The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes. You received 2 sets of minutes. The first was from our regular Zoom meeting on November 8th. It was not a Zoom meeting, however. Was it not an in-person meeting, Karen?
Yes, it was. It's up, what it says up on the top.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we'll have to amend that. And why don't we finish with these meeting minutes then, since I started? Given that one amendment, is there anybody who has any other changes they would like to suggest?
I move that we approve those minutes as amended.
Okay, is there a seconder?
Seconded.
Christine Gray, all in favor, raise your hands and say aye.
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 So those are approved. The next minutes are from our special meeting, November 15th, which was also an in-person meeting in conjunction with the Cornwall Conservation Commission. Does anybody have any amendments for those minutes?
But I'm doing this from memory, but I think it said that Bruce came in late, but I think it was maybe Steve Sicardi that came in late.
Yeah, that's a good point, James. I was there as well. I can testify that I witnessed that.
I'm looking at the minutes right now and they do not say that, oh, he came in at 7:55. You're right. So we should amend the minutes to strike that.
Okay, what does it say? Who came in?
That Bruce Bennett came in at 7:55. but
Okay.
In fact, he was there at 7 o'clock,
Steve
Okay.
Sicardi came in at,
at 7:55.
yeah.
Okay, and that was the combined conservation.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct. Any other changes? Thank you for that, James. Good for you. We must care for our reputations of our colleagues.
Exactly.
Thank you, James.
the meeting was
He
only
did his
like an hour.
Oh,
The meeting was only like an hour long, so Steve came in at the very end then, right?
No,
No, it was-
Take an hour and a half.
8:20,
Okay.
Yeah.
Karen.
Does he show up in the top? It's listed in attendance?
yes,
No. Stephen Sicardi is listed, yes.
yes.
Okay. But it should be that he came in at 7:55, so there's a content. Okay, I'll change that all around.
I didn't think he was that late, but maybe he was.
Does it really matter? Are these things that important for them?
No, if it was a meeting with a lot of motions and somebody came in late and they
Got it.
and it
Mhm.
doesn't reflect that, and somebody says, will you approve that? And they weren't there to approve it, then
I see.
Yeah.
Could I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Keith. Second, James. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hands. Thank you. Moving on. New applications, none. Pending applications, none. Staff report.
you see just several zoning permits listed. There's a couple other things in the works. I was hoping to have the sign up for the new store down in West Cornwall, or excuse me, in Cornwall Bridge, the 2 retail signs, but I'm actually working with the sign person to get it within the 12-foot requirement, because it's going to be up in the eaves of the building. And so she was going to size it down for me. She's actually a woman I work with on signs at the district, so she knew what I meant. So that is in the process for the sign to go up on for the 2 retail stores. Obviously, everybody's hearing what's going on down in Cornwall Bridge with the fly shop and the Berkshire General Store, which is all moving ahead. And there are things moving ahead in West Cornwall. So in the next couple of months, you're going to hear some other great things that are coming down the pike. There's lots of talk, lots of plans being worked on, and a lot of finalization. So that's, people are very, very positive in both ends of town.
Excellent. Nice to hear. Okay, any correspondence and communications? Probably none, correct?
No, I have really nothing.
Okay. Other business proper to come before the commission was to approve the 2023 meeting dates, but you don't have that document to share with us, do you, Karen?
No, I do not. I actually already posted them, but at this point in time, we need to add the meeting date for our planning meeting.
Okay, this is a good point for me to tell everybody that the planning meeting date has once again been changed because of conflicts. Gordon Ridgway had a conflict. So now we're having our annual town planning meeting on Monday, December 30th at 7 p.m. by Zoom. And for those of you who maybe haven't attended one before, have all of you attended one before?
Do you mean January 30th?
January 30th?
Yeah, sorry, guys, January 30th. Oh boy, I better check with the Chronicle to be sure I gave them, no, I did give them the right date, never mind. So you all know that it's an opportunity for the various boards and commissions in town who have responsibilities under the town plan to report briefly on the activities that they have participated in during the past year. It's a nice way to make sure people don't forget the town plan, which all too often in different communities gets put on a shelf and then never looked at. All right, then.
And Anna, you should add that we personally, because you and I have done it, and then Jill before, and I can't remember who even did it before then. We send emails to the chairman or of every person that's listed as a partner in the town plan. So it's the Cornwall Conservation Trust, it's Board of Selectmen, it's everybody that has something checked off as what they're supposed to be doing or working on or thinking about as part of their plan. So we will be working on that list, and everybody will get personal emails and reminders. And if they cannot appear, they can also send in reports that will be made part of the record.
Did you say that's a Zoom meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, we're down to the planning workshop.
I have a
Oh, sorry.
question. And sorry, about our next couple meetings, January and February. I will hopefully be out of town. I'm not sure if we're considering those to be in person or
No,
Zoom.
my plans for the duration of the winter are Zoom meetings.
Right.
You don't need to be driving around in the snow at night.
Right.
Yeah. We had the fun of getting together in person a couple of times, and now we'll just have to live on that joy for a while.
Yeah, it was fun, but yeah,
But Puerto Rico is more fun.
that's what I'm thinking.
So let's go on to the planning meeting. We have still a big job ahead of us. Go ahead, Janelle.
Great. Before we jump in, Keith, there are moments where there's a little bit of feedback on your phone. If I mute you, it's absolutely no offense. I hope that you're able to unmute manually.
Yeah, I unmuted and then I'm using my phone mute now so that it won't bother you again. Sorry.
No, not at all. I just didn't want you to feel cut out of the meeting in any way. So aside from that housekeeping, do we want to talk big picture before we get into details? What is the feeling of the General Commission?
I would very much like to take a look at the reorganized table of contents I sent you. Are you willing to start with that?
Happily. And Madam Chair, do you want me to bring up your version, or do you want me to bring up what's on what was circulated to the group from myself?
Well, let's bring up both. Can you do that
Okay.
on a split screen?
At the moment, my desktop isn't set up for that, but I can do it. Give me 2 quick seconds.
Well, if I share my screen, if someone lets me share my, no, I don't know.
I can, but I can also,
That won't, okay.
yeah, I can also do this. Give me 1 second.
So I'm just going to talk generally about it. I started thinking about the progression of topics in our table of contents. And I felt that they weren't as logical as they might be. For example, if we look at intent and purpose, that's a very good beginning, as are zoning districts and zoning map. I felt that we should follow that with definitions and interpretations, because unless people understand all the words we're going to use, nothing that comes afterwards is going to make that much sense. Correct me are you looking at my document that I sent you? Because I'm not.
So I have just what has been circulated with the commission, just sort of for simplicity's sake. What I can also do is edit. This is currently as a PDF, the way it's presenting. I can add in all of your thoughts that you're about to go through, just so everyone can sort of gather your thinking and follow along.
Right.
How does that sound?
That sounds fine. What I want to do is have my document in front of me, so give me a second to dig it up.
Sure. Because I'll just, I believe you said definitions after.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had that thought as well.
Great.
I was trying to figure out, well, that and Article 5, I guess it was what are now 3, 4, and 5. I thought that they might have been moved around. So that did occur to me. I wasn't sure how.
And I think getting into the general overlay, because this project has morphed into being a reformatting, and because the composition of the membership on the commission has changed in some way, to really think of this comprehensively as an opportunity. If we're looking at the overall organization, now is truly the chance to get it where we want to be. So any and all thinking, I think, just to talk it through as a group and decide what makes the most sense, not only for the user, all of you guys that will bring these regulations to every meeting, but also for any applicant that's going to grab them online and try to get through the application process.
All right, so I now have both my documents side by side, and I can continue to talk you through it. So after definitions, I thought it would be appropriate to provide people with a list of what the uses are, land uses are in town that are permitted, that are either allowed by right or require a zoning permit or require a special permit. Once they understand that, the next section would be general standards, which is basically the section that gives an overview of how the commission evaluates land use decisions. After that, dimensional requirements. And then after that, a section on what zoning permits are. As the Janelle's work is set up now, we don't have any discussion or description of zoning permits until section 12, enforcement. So I think that discussion needs to come out of enforcement. It used to live as section 1 in the current regs. So it was right up front, prominent. So that the enforcement actions will remain a separate section at the end, but the discussion of what the zoning permit entails should be moved. That's the least complicated and most common land use. The next section should be site plans and special permits, which is more complex land uses. The next one after that should be overlay zones, because those are the most complex land uses. And then after that, the specific use provisions, which are all unique regulatory situations. And then the last three stay the same: signs and parking. I thought development standards, it would be clearer if we called it lot development standards, because that's what they are. And then the final one, administration and enforcement. So I'm sorry I didn't send these around to you. I will. But I think this change makes for a much more logical progression, and I would be interested in what Janelle thinks.
So in the meantime, I brought up your document on the screen just as you're walking everyone else through your thinking. And again, this is a document of the commission and also of its users. So I am facilitating the process. I'm not wed to any, it's you expressing your regulations. So I'm not wed to any sort of overall organization. It's really truly what the commission sees as being most beneficial for yourselves as commissioners, passing that down the line as your term changes. And then also, of course, always to be a useful document for applicants and property owners throughout town. So again, not so much that I would have an opinion.
Okay, I get it. So what I think we should do now, since I've sprung this on everybody, is not discuss it further. I'll send it around and you can all look at it and think about it, and we'll save discussing it for another meeting. Does that make sense to everybody?
My only remaining question is just if we pull administration out of enforcement, sort of as you summarized, and then so this would no longer really have the administration, the overview of a zoning permit, but would come in earlier on in the document.
Right, so they would just be enforcement then.
Yes.
Right.
And then just thinking through where that administration piece would live, I didn't quite gather where you intended that, sort of as a general standards item or more so earlier in the document.
I think I hadn't really been focusing on that so much. It was the part about zoning permits, explaining what a zoning permit is.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
concerned me. I didn't think it should be at the very end.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the difference between the distinction between commission permits versus just administrative permits, something that Karen would review versus the overall commission, it's a little lost within the document as far as like at what point one gets where until you get to the permitted uses section. But again, because this is strictly a reformatting, my hands are really tied with adding new explanatory language. So I didn't go there.
Okay. I don't see any reason I'm looking at your final document now. I don't see any reason why administration and enforcement can't be together at the end.
Okay.
It's just the part about zoning.
Yeah. Or like the
Hang on.
first and foremost, the zoning permit piece.
Right, just that.
I would think about putting definitions second instead of third. Maybe you don't want to go into all this now, but
I think we're all gonna have our.
you opened a can of worms there.
Yeah.
No, I think it's important. You know, one of our purposes was to make it less difficult for people to go through these regulations and understand them. And I think there is a logical progression.
I like it, but are we gonna look at it and not discuss it now?
I don't feel I've given you enough time to think about it. So I will send this document to you and we'll figure out, we'll just decide about it another time. Perhaps each of you as individuals, without copying everybody else in, could send me your ideas. And then I could put it all together into a new document that reflects the majority opinions. And we can approve it at our next meeting. In other words, we could do a little background work without having a separate meeting. Is that?
Personally, I think it'd be fun for the commission to actually think through these ideas, because it's going to be our document, and it should be a cumulative thing that we don't do independently and then come together. I think it'd be,
Okay, all right. In that
Right.
case, we'll just postpone this. I
I
don't
mean,
want
that's
it.
just my opinion, but I don't know
No,
what.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I should have sent this to you ahead of time so you could think about it. I don't want to discuss this anymore. We have a lot of other stuff to do tonight. We will postpone the discussion until everybody's had a chance to study it.
Great.
I'll carry on with what Janelle wants to accomplish tonight.
Sure. Okay. It is really important, the overall, because the whole exercise is pretty much organization, just getting the ordering of the sections to a place where the commission thinks it's legible for themselves and for others, it will inform the overall document. So we will be at somewhat of a standstill until we have that comprehensive conversation.
I get it.
Yeah, and just I talking the overall concepts out with the commission. We've gone so deeply into the weeds with each and every section to really think of it, to what James says, like as your document, whereas just because it was organized in a way in the past, it might inform a new way now. So certainly now's when we're doing the organization and the reorganization. So that'll certainly be a big piece of where the document evolves to.
My understanding was that the document you sent us had a lot of yellow areas, that those were the areas we needed to return to. Is that accurate?
Yes, and I've taken a few notes on some really big pieces. Either it was later in the night or we just weren't at a place where we were comfortable voting on anything. So what I can do now, and let me minimize this and pull up sort of the grand PDF that was sent, and really touch upon, again, getting back to the details. So we can touch upon those pieces because they will be inform the overall document, certainly. So let me grab this. Okay, so I was trying to follow Anna's talking and thinking around table of contents. So don't judge that at the moment for its current way it looks. We'll leave that alone for now. So, and again, we've gone through sort of article by article, but the grand pieces that are hanging out there, and please jump in if anything catches your eye or that you recall. I really remember having a very long discussion when we got to our general provisions 1, because it's truly where items were added that are not a part of the current regulations. So when we get to uniformity, that's already within our document, the current regulations, and getting into community standards was a little bit more than what the regulations currently say. So a lot of what's written in 3.4 comes from 8-2 in the Connecticut general statutes that really bring to light concepts that are in the Zoning Enabling Act about municipalities needing to think through potential impact on contiguous municipalities, cultural, historical, other implications of their actions. So I wanted to revisit this section and really think, since we are talking so much about reformatting, are we bringing all of this new concept into the general provisions of the regulations? Because to bring everyone back to what the general provisions are, they're truly standards that are applicable throughout town, regardless of the use and regardless of the zone. So it's just your blanket standards, and a lot was added there when
Would
it
you
comes
share
to.
your screen then?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was. Let me pull that up. Yeah, so there we go. So the beginning of general provisions very much already within our regulations, and the pages are mentioned. When we get into 3.4, our community standards, especially towards the end, historical, cultural resources, environmental protection, health and prosperity, all of these elements come into Zoning Enabling Act 8-2, but were never articulated in the current regulations. So this is sort of the first part of the reformat where we get into truly quote unquote new material. So I wanted to revisit this, especially 3.6. This is the item about adverse impacts. This was not pre-existing in the current regulations. So just wanted to bring all these pretty major pieces before the commission so that we can have this discussion.
I'd like to start, since as usual, I have something to say. And I've thought about all of this, and I think that this whole discussion is excellent and outstanding, and it does reflect the statute. All of these items are mentioned in the current statute. And as far as the adverse effects, that's basically an explanation of why we need zoning regulations in the first place. So it's educational in that sense. But my bottom line is that there is nothing in this new section that at all fails to reflect the tone or the purposes of our old zoning regulations. I don't think any of this stuff is actually a new idea that would require public input and a public hearing and a big commission vote. But that's my opinion. I'm sure we're going to hear from James.
And just for James, sorry to jump in, but just a lot of what's written actually in general provisions is within the document in some way, shape, or form. It's just not within one piece that's very much at the forefront of the regulations. It's something that you'll see we get to on like page 70, 76 or 21 later in the document that isn't brought into one article as strictly saying all of these standards apply all over town, regardless of use, regardless of zoning district.
You want me to speak?
Well, I want anybody who has given this any thought at all to speak. If it's something that has disturbed you or has made you sit up and take note, I'd like to hear about it. Bruce.
I think I agree with you, Anna, that this is really just a kind of a summary of what the regulations really required anyway. I think we have to be careful about being afraid of, the exact verbiage that was in the original documents, transferring that into this, as long as we keep the intention, the way it was supposed to be.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, I think this works.
And I mean, just to add, a lot of it too, sadly, is not up to us locally, just because that we are given our statutory boundaries. So much of this comes from Zoning Enabling Act, which is 8-2, which gives all the powers to the commission that they have, and is really the parameters of the power of a planning and zoning commission, and the limits of sort of their governing rules. So it is, it's just a reiteration of that in one place at one time.
Any
And
other? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, James.
I had a question about the actual language in terms of is that from the state statute that says shall to the maximum extent possible not produce? I'm just curious if that seems like awfully strong language to talk about light not exiting a property.
No,
And
so if you recall, this was definitely a big, long discussion that we had as the commission, and why I left it in green was to revisit this because of the fact that this was a commission decision to use the language shall to the maximum extent possible not produce glare, heat, or illumination which extends beyond a site's property lines, because in the previous current regulations, if you recall, it as far as illumination goes, that it even says it shall not extend past the property lines. And I don't know about you, but I take walks in Cornwall and I happen to notice lighting beyond property lines, and it isn't offensive. It happens. So we actually got rid of that language so that there would be more flexibility, because how stringent, if lighting cannot produce a glare that extends beyond your property line, I think many of us would be in violation, especially this holiday season.
well, I just didn't know if we want to use that exact language or say, you know, if we should minimize to the extent possible any light exiting or something like that. If obviously we are going to revisit it, that's because it's in green. So if we're ever going to discuss it, now is the time, or a convenient time.
I couldn't agree more.
But that's just my, you know, off the cuff opinion of, is that actually, it just strikes me as still pretty strong in terms of what we're saying.
And I mean,
I'm okay with that.
I think even a nicer, softer way is just like careful consideration shall be given to minimize glare, heat, or illumination, which extends beyond a site's property.
Right.
Well, look, can I ask you a question? Does this, is this, there's lots of pre-existing, as you said, Janelle, you walk around Cornwall and you see it existing. Isn't this really govern new construction? And wouldn't we want to encourage them to, you know, keep their light on their own property? Other towns are adopting dark skies, which I believe is even more restrictive than what this statement makes. Are you aware of that, Janelle, the dark skies?
Yes, I am, absolutely. It's referenced in several towns that I work in to use their standards for outdoor illumination from this point forward with new development. And I think your point around the fact that this is, you know, any non-conformity that's sort of out there pre-existing would fall into the non-conformity side of things, and that this would be looked at from the date it's effective moving forward. It's an interesting mention, certainly.
I'm not inclined to soften that language because it already builds in some freedom for the ZEO and the commission to decide if someone has made the maximum effort to shield their neighbors. And our sign regs absolutely say, when we go over them again, they absolutely say that lighting shall not be visible from the public right of way. So right. So actually what it says is that the source of the lighting itself shall not be visible from the public right of way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't say that the light can't be visible from the public right of way, but the big light glaring in your face when you're standing on the road is part of our sign regs.
I have a question.
I don't know. What are, you know, it's a good thing Mohawk Mountain is grandfathered in. That's all I. Michelle?
I have a question. When it comes to saying like the maximum extent possible, I feel like that's open to like a lot of interpretation of what is the maximum extent possible? Like, what would somebody be required to do to block the light, and how much money would that cost somebody? Would their neighbor be able to point to this and say, well, they didn't put up blocking, or fill in the blank, whatever could be done to shield those things? Like, are we boxing ourselves into enforcing something that's going to be a burden on the people?
It's a very good point, Michelle, but it's why we have a zoning enforcement officer. And she every day uses her excellent judgment in helping people to make the modifications they need. For example, she talked earlier about the new sign down in Cornwall Bridge. The original proposed sign was pretty massive. It violated our sign regs. And she is actually working directly with the sign construction person to bring it in line with our regulations. So she's doing this as a favor to the shop owner because Karen has a direct line. So I think,
But just to jump into to Michelle's point, rather than boxing one in, it actually leads to the flexibility so that it falls into a ZEO's hands and a property owner's hands, where there are nuances, especially in land use regulations, where it would truly be the onus of a property owner to plead their case to the ZEO that there is a nuisance and that it's caused by, for example, their neighbor's light. And then Karen, as CEO, would be the one that's, you know, dealing with the situation, moderating it between the property owners, making sure that efforts have been taken to minimize that glare to the maximum extent possible. So rather than have it be a specific, you know, with noise decibel, with light, you know, the lumens that extend beyond the property, to have it be, if a property owner declares it a nuisance and Karen happens to be involved because it's being declared a zoning violation, that there is a nuance there. Because nuisances to one aren't nuisances to all in many particular cases. And that's really why her position is so difficult and so case by case, no matter how much many people don't love that. They want rules written in stone. There's a lot of instances where it isn't as straightforward as we would like it to be, especially around nuisances like glare and noise. Those are really probably some of the trickier zoning pieces to ever become involved with when it comes to enforcement.
James?
Yeah, actually, what you just said makes a lot of sense. I wasn't reading it in the way you just interpreted it because of the word "and" creates a hazard. And I think that should say "which creates a hazard," so that we're not saying that any light generated can't. It's light that would create a hazard or nuisance that we want to minimize.
Great. I love your very clear, very simple word changes. Absolutely.
I think the physicist in me was like, wait a minute, we can't, we don't have a bunch of black holes in town that you're not going to be able to see light from houses. And so it's just nuisance light that we're worried about.
Exactly. Hazard light and nuisance light. And I think your tweak of that one word, beyond a site's property lines, which creates a hazard or nuisance. And then that's where the nuances come in. If Karen gets a call and a neighbor's like, this is a nuisance, that's where, you know, she's boots on the ground dealing with what is a perceived nuisance.
That's just me, but. Yeah.
I like it. Any other comments? Do we need a motion to? Sorry.
I like it with the change. I would like it with the change. Before I felt like it was too strict, but now I like that change James made. That's good.
Great. It's amazing language.
Absolutely.
Do we need to make a motion and vote to accept this section? I think we should, given the long discussion. So could I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Keith. Could I have a second? That's Christine. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It passes. We can move on.
All right. So then we get into definitions and interpretations. And the one thing I did want to revisit, unless anyone else has anything else to revisit, was adding plot plan. So moving right along, I know there was a little bit of discussion between like, when are we asking? Oh,
Sorry, Janelle, I have a couple like typo things. Do we want to talk about any of that now or do we not?
I mean, totally up to you. Sometimes like a simple email just directed to me might be the simplest way to handle that, but always open. I love extra eyes. I've been staring at this document for over 2 years. So it's nice to have like fresh eyes.
Yeah, I want to suggest that those of you who are alert to typos, send an email to Janelle.
And some of it's more like wording stuff that maybe
That should be a discussion.
Then it should be a discussion. Sorry, James.
Yeah, I definitely working out some of the wording nuances I do like to have as a discussion.
Carry on. What do you have, James?
well, sorry, I got a combination of both. So on page 3, you have promote housing twice.
Yes, thank you. Anna picked up on that as well.
4.1, you have a set twice. I don't know what that is.
Housing, yes. So
4.1 general rules, you have
page 1.
set in the last edition of Webster's Unabridged.
Hold on 1 second. Twice. And then what page did you jump to, James?
4.1. That's page 6.
Excellent. Thank you.
You have a set.
Okay, excellent.
Page 9.
Oh, hang on. She's still letter.
Yeah.
Oh,
Got
we're
it,
doing it.
So using the definition in the latest, so get rid of set, using the definition in the latest edition of Webster's Unabridged Dictionary.
I just didn't understand the 2
No,
sets.
I don't either. 6. And
Good
then,
pickup.
okay.
And the next one's for the commission in general.
Okay. So is it okay if I jump in just to mention that plot plan was something that got added that was not a discussion amongst the commission?
We had asked you, however, to add plot plan to the definitions.
Yes, and it is now here. Does it, just for everyone, so in italics is anything that was more of an editorial ad, anything that is not verbatim from the current set of regulations, so that all readers are aware that this is going to be an ad. Do you feel comfortable with what's in there? How it reads, a depiction of one's property for the purposes of permitting that does not involve a Connecticut licensed surveyor. It can be acceptable for the purpose of determining zoning compliance for minimum site improvements. Minimal site improvements such as, yeah, such as decks, sheds, and outbuildings, and the ZEO and/or commission reserves the right to request an A2 quality survey should it be necessary to determine zoning compliance. Do you feel comfortable with that if the minimum is changed to minimal?
We should. I've been doing plot plans for everything on that list on my property.
I'm glad I used those examples.
I did a deck that way and I did an outbuilding that way, and I did not have to hire a surveyor. I was able to draw things myself.
Great, yeah.
And, you know, I think everybody should be able to do that.
As long as they really take the measurements and actually know where their lot lines are, which
Yeah.
in my mind is
Yeah.
really questionable a lot of times.
Yes.
Well, when I bought my property, I have a copy of the original A2 survey, so I have the outline.
But do you know where the line is? Do you actually know where the line is in the woods or in the field?
Yeah, but I think adding a deck to your house, you don't need to know all that much. You
Hmm.
just have to draw the square of your house in there and show where the deck is and prove that it's not over the septic system.
And if it's so, if it's 100 feet from the property line or 150 plus,
Right.
and there's no chance of it being on the property line itself.
Karen allowed this. And I think she's not speaking much tonight, but I think.
So
she'll tell you.
I am chuckling because that's an interesting,
Karen allowed this.
it's an interesting discussion when somebody comes in with a plan in which all of their various parts of their project, the garage and whatever, are right on setback lines to minimize distance or have some particular whatever. And the fact that those are the most difficult issues, just explain to somebody that they simply can't do that, and that I have to require an A2 survey and to have the foundation pinned before you pour. And boy, that has raised a great amount of consternation in more than one.
And you should have an as-built after that, Karen.
Yeah, and so it's nice that this plot plan gives you, it basically says, you will be requesting an A2 survey if needed.
That's the fail-safe.
Yep.
Yeah, it just to have it, the more times that you can have it in writing too, I think is helpful. Just so you can say like, no, per page 10, if I can't determine compliance, I'm gonna need an A2. I think. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
This
I
is
think
actually a recurring theme throughout this new regulation format. It's that phrasing several times, and I personally approve of that.
And then another thing just that I've done now that we're using some definitions that come straight from statute, linking them in. So if you click on any of these kind of aqua colored links, that will take you actually to that chapter in state statute. And then of course, as amended, we might have to just verify these links over time. But a lot of these amendments came back in 2016 and maybe even sooner. So there won't be much change, and we haven't seen much change.
I thought that was great, Janelle. That's really nice.
Oh, wonderful.
I think it will be helpful. Just the background some people are details people and they want to know a little bit more. So the additional reading, it's helpful, and it gives the commission a leg to stand on too. If you want to know, okay, where did this granny pod definition come from, to understand that too. One thing I did want to return to actually, as I was moving farther away from the nitty gritty and just reading through, I got to this camping unit definition, and it does say, maybe this is me being persnickety, but it does read a vehicle designed, used, or intended for temporary use for camping, recreation, travel, and/or vacationing, and is or can be mounted on wheels or self-propelled. I didn't want to take liberty to make many changes, but I definitely hit reading that a few times over and couldn't help but bring it to the commission. Is there a simpler way that we could kind of get at what the definition is trying to say?
Just remove self-propelled. I don't understand that word. Who has ever seen a self-propelled camping unit?
I have one.
What is
Camper.
It's a
van.
camper. It's a C-class camper.
It's like when there's a vehicle.
Mercedes with a camper on the back of it.
Yeah.
Oh, a C-class. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a pull-along trailer. It's the one you drive in, right? That's what they're saying.
Right.
The kind you see on that very narrow road in Colorado, like over the pass. With the,
Right.
You're like, oh man, does that guy have a license for that?
That was
Yeah.
James.
But
Sorry.
I mean, even with and maybe that was just me, it caught my eye that it was a little awkward in there. If it just reads a vehicle designed, used, or intended for temporary use for camping, recreation, travel, and or vacationing and is or can be mounted on wheels, period. Is that plenty?
Yes.
I would
Okay.
put the period after vacationing, because a vehicle is already something that can
On
be mounted
wheels,
on wheels.
right,
I'm
right.
I'm comfortable with that. I just didn't want to go doing this behind the scenes without everyone being here with me.
Okay, go ahead. I don't think, if anybody objects, speak now or forever hold your peace.
So what's a
Alright.
small house?
I'd like to back up on a buildable area. I'm sorry, buildable lot.
Why am I not surprised? Happy to do it. Let's go there.
Right there.
You're on the same page, so it shouldn't be too bad. It caught me that we're not saying, like, a buildable lot can have water on it, can have wetlands, water course, or flood hazards on it, right? Or
Buildable area or buildable lot? Which
Buildable
one?
lot.
well, you have buildable lot, a legally created parcel that contains required land area to satisfy minimum dimensional requirements, is accessible from a public right of way, free of deeds and other land restrictions such as wetlands, water courses, or flood hazards.
The restriction would be a modification by the Inland and Wetlands Agency, a condition set by them.
Or the overlay maps.
Yeah, or there's weird easements like Eversource easements and Public Act 490 easements and those sorts of things.
I don't understand. So a parcel that contains the required land area to satisfy the minimal dimensional requirements. But you could have a 5 acre, say you're in a 5 acre zone, R5 zone.
Yep.
You don't have to have 5 acres that don't have water on them. You could have 4 acres that have water on it and 1 acre that's your buildable area where the house can go. And it still satisfies all of your requirements. You don't need a special exemption or anything, right? It's an R5 zone, some of it's wetland, but you came before the commission, shown that you have a driveway, your setbacks in your buildable area that's free of water. But the buildable lot is am I missing something? That's just your
No,
R5 lot.
I see your point.
No,
it is
I
unclear.
do. I see your point as well. Because the buildable lot, it's essentially, in short, a legally created parcel that satisfies minimum dimensional requirements.
And has a buildable area on it. It's got to contain a buildable area, or right, which is part of the dimensional requirements.
And then you get into the importance of that definition of buildable area.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think because we've never gotten a definition of buildable lot into the regulations.
Yeah, we want to get that one right because that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Well, doesn't this play to the horror that we heard at the last meeting or the meeting before, where people have lots that they think they can sell, but that they can't sell because it doesn't follow these restrictions?
The one.
The rules for creating a buildable lot are in current section 11, called the chapter lot development, where all these things are reiterated again. The need to meet minimum dimensional requirements, the need to have an adequate public access way, the need to have adequate water supply and sanitary systems. That's all in there. And maybe we should just remove this other land restrictions piece because it's confusing.
Yeah, the one thing to leave in would be actually James' addition of a buildable area, but also the piece about accessibility is accessible from a public right of way or a private road, or or a private easement, or a private access way. I think it might be most simple to just have it say access way, because We do have a section, if we recall later, when we get into that lot development chapter, we do get into what an access way has to be, and it's satisfying all of the emergency operation requirements. But it sounds like the crux of buildable lot is truly the buildable minimum dimensional requirements, your accessibility, and then also your buildable area.
Yeah,
What about being free of deed restrictions or being free of pertinent deed restrictions? Karen, do you see significant deed restrictions ever?
Sure, there's conservation
Yeah,
land.
I mean, there's public 490 land.
Right.
There's, exactly to Bruce's point, there's conservation easement land. There's lots that would satisfy the definition of buildable lot that aren't buildable lots because of their covenants.
So then we should include
But that's
some
what-
language about deed restrictions.
Does that really belong in our zoning regs though? Deed restrictions are deed restrictions. They're not
Yeah,
really.
those are private, which is an interesting thing. Somebody has deed restrictions and they don't like it. And it's not the town it's not our office that enforces certain
No.
deed
Yeah, it's nothing-
restrictions. View
Nothing
shed,
we could do.
yeah.
But I do think it's worth a mention because it would be really unfortunate if anyone is raising question with the town and going to the CEO and saying, I have a buildable lot because I satisfy your definition of buildable lot. And there's no mention of deed restrictions. That's a tricky one as well. Just not
Yeah, but
mentioned.
that's their due diligence they should be doing on reading their deed when they buy, I don't know. I don't think it really belongs in our zoning regs.
Yeah, I get that too. It's
Boy,
I mean, do we even want to take a stab at this buildable lot definition and just talk about buildable area? That's the other question. It's never been in the regulations prior. I mean, we reference it when we get to our attainable lots, because we're really honing in on the parcels that the Cornwall Housing Corp or any other nonprofit can create.
I think it's important to leave it
Yeah.
in there because for a lot of people, they don't understand that a given piece of land might not have a buildable lot. They need to understand, people need to get that concept.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
let's just remove anything that's confusing. The part that James brought up.
so if it reads a legally created parcel that contains the required land area to satisfy minimum dimensional requirements is accessible from a public right of way or a private road,
Private access way.
and then to get rid of the rest of it, but
Right.
to add and contains a buildable area.
Right.
So Karen, can I ask
buildable-
you, can I ask Karen a question? Do you not check to make sure that the land isn't under conservation or other restriction?
That's not really it's not really my job to do that, is to do research on somebody's lot. And that's exactly what the problem is coming up in Cornwall with some of the deed restrictions and what are on these lots, on various lots, how they're created. Yeah. If somebody buys a lot, for instance, with an association that has on the deed that there is view shed. James, you know exactly what I'm talking about here, Colesfoot
yeah,
Valley.
Colesfoot Valley Association, there's overlays, basically.
It is not my place to research or enforce.
And
It's
that's
up to those who will put the
the buyer's,
restrictions on.
It
the
is.
buyer's attorney and the person doing the title search are supposed to bring these things to the attention of the buyer, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, and if violated, it's up to the person who put the restrictions on, or the association or whatever, to then sue them for it. It's not Karen's job or our jobs.
Yeah,
That's like a
Would it-
homeowners association or something.
Yeah,
like that.
homeowners
Yeah.
association.
Yeah, I mean, it happens, it's come up very recently in a town in which I do work. There was like a development, for lack of a better term, and they wanted me to enforce their rule that said you couldn't have a portable RV. And I was like, I am not the enforcement body. And if it's been basically disevolved and you don't have this group anymore, I cannot, it's not my role. And it's trickier because we're finding that the lots that are getting developed are these harder to discern when it comes
Exactly.
to like the land that's left. And it is the tricky lot, like the last lot in a subdivision that didn't get built upon, that doesn't have the best access, or this lot that has a lot of questions about it. We're seeing that, I think, more. Moving forward, we'll probably continue to see it.
Mhm.
I
So
deal with that a lot in Woodridge Lake and stuff like that in Goshen. They have, they have stricter setbacks for their rear setbacks and stuff than the zoning regs say. So you may look at the zoning regs and think, oh, I've only got a 25-foot rear setback, but then when you read the stuff for Woodridge Lake, it is half the lot depth pretty much. So it's not up to us to make our regulations match their people's deed restrictions.
So
Yeah,
maybe we would.
And
we would
the
take
other
out-
thing is too often people are, if things are going into foreclosures, quick claims, that there is no background research on it, and it's caused great issues in Cornwall recently.
Yes.
Great.
Now, just to finish off this buildable lot piece, for it to read and contains at least one buildable area, a buildable area, how does the commission feel about, because some lots do contain obviously more than one buildable area.
But we need a minimum of one.
Great.
So I would say
So a buildable area is fine.
At least one.
Great.
I was gonna suggest on this concept of listening about, like, especially with Keith saying, like, the zoning regs with the association, those things are different. Would it be a case of just putting a line in that says something about directing them basically to check your deed and other restrictions of like the wetlands? Because you can get a buildable lot, like James said, that has all these wetlands. You can still build in a different area. You just need to know what your buildable area is. So in putting that in there, more of a helpful hint to our new people is that, like, you may want to check these other things to make sure that your lot is buildable, because these things you're going to have to comply with restrictions or perhaps extra rules. Is there a way we can word something in there that might help them understand that?
Isn't that what this says, though? And I agree, maybe take out the deeds, but I'd leave in the wetlands and watercourses. I think if you ask Karen, that's one of the biggest problems that people, ignore when they're
Yeah.
trying to figure out whether it's a good lot or not,
Well, wetland soils can look dry.
right?
Wet soils can be dry soils. They're not necessarily wetland soils, which are protected. There's many things that are coming up that people are not aware of: ledge, rock, building other constraints that, and when somebody comes in and I look at my map and it's 25% slope in so many areas, it's like, you can't just put a driveway straight up 25% slope. Just look at this. How are you going to get there? Well, I can just go straight up. No, you can't go straight up. You can't get great. But though all of those things, but the whole issue about people not doing as much research and before they buy things, and not getting somebody in to make an educated decision and help them make better decisions.
I was
My
thinking,
thing
Bruce,
is-
instead of saying, sorry, I was just gonna say, instead of saying like free of deeds and other land restrictions, is must comply or shall comply with your deed and land restrictions, just so they know there may be other things involved. Not that it has to be free from them, because you can have the water hazards and the flood hazards. You just can't necessarily build in that that space, but your lot would still be considered buildable, even if you had a flood hazard. You could build it on the other side of your lot, right?
It depends. It would depend.
It depends on whether the
We're
lot
get-
is adequate.
I think we're getting a little sidetracked just from a definition perspective in terms of a zoning definition perspective, a buildable lot. It only needs three things. It's got to have a buildable area, the accessibility, and the dimensional requirements. If it satisfies those three things, it's a buildable lot according to the town planning and zoning commission.
I don't think we should add a whole lot more. If these people aren't doing their due diligence anyway, what makes you think they're gonna read the definitions in our zoning regs and all of a
That's
sudden the lights
Thank
go
you.
off?
I was
And
gonna
it's
say,
actually, they could use it against us because if they have those three things legally, they have a buildable lot.
Well, and that's where I'm sort of trying to cut
Yes.
the line and join us all in the middle. So I'm going to throw out one more thought. And it would be that it reads a legally created parcel that contains the required land area to satisfy minimum dimensional requirements, is accessible from a public right of way or a private access way, free of other land use restrictions, and then in our parentheses, such as wetlands, watercourses, flood hazards, and private deeds. And that can, and let's get rid of this because this is a Torrington Health District thing and that's not our business. But if we at least give a little teaser, you might need to deal with wetlands, you might need to deal with private deeds, and you might need to deal with flood hazards to toe the
Yeah.
line of sort of giving a little bit of information, but not trying to cover it all.
But Janelle, you could have all those, it's not, it doesn't need to be free of any of those things.
For it to
That's
be,
right. We're back to the
It's-
original point. If the
Yeah,
land
it
property
just
is
has to have a
big enough,
buildable area.
Yeah.
You could be in a wetland area, if it's, yeah, we don't want to give them the illusion that it has to be free of a wetland.
but I think, and I think, so I think you're looking at it as like all combined. Not, so if the minimum dimensional requirements are met, like the 2 acre minimum zoning, if that's met, great, you're a buildable lot. However, there's still restrictions on your property that would come from a flood hazard overlay, a private deed, or flood hazards. It doesn't mean that you don't have a buildable lot. It's just the other land restrictions might come into play, even with a quote unquote buildable lot.
Right.
but is this the place to mention them?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
But
think it is.
and to James' point, to be a buildable lot, you would have to have a buildable area. Otherwise, it's not buildable. So,
And the buildable area is called out in the dimensional requirements as well. You've got a minimum buildable areas associated with those, in that chart that we have of our R1, R5, and R3, and it talks about the minimum dimensional width. Each lot shall have a buildable area. I think
Well-
that's part of our,
And
Look
no,
at the definition of buildable area. It's right above buildable
Yeah.
lot. It says
Yeah.
all of this.
yeah.
it already mentions the wetlands and things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I was just like, well, actually, what James's point is folded in. If you read further and look at buildable area, and that's really where the question lies is, well, do you have a buildable area? If you have a private deed, if you have a flood hazard, if you have wetlands, if you have ledge, if you have agricultural easement, you might not have a buildable area.
Right.
correct.
I'm gonna
So
repeat it again.
we have
It's just
come
a buildable
around.
lot has
to
to have a
what-
buildable area.
we've
But
come
we just
around-
gone with James earlier.
Exactly. All right.
James always simplifies language and I always appreciate it at the end, but he does have to get us all there with him.
Right. And I'm saying, I'm not very good. I'm convoluted.
No,
Just
you
talk to
aren't.
My wife, she.
No.
So then it would read a legally created parcel that contains required land area to satisfy minimum dimensional requirements, is accessible from a public right of way or a private access way, and contains a buildable area. Then you get to definition
Period.
of
That's it.
period. Then you get to definition of buildable area and we get to a rectangular area of a lot with a minimum dimension of 100 feet per side that contains no wetland soils, water bodies, water courses, I'll add courses, utilities, or access easements, rights of way, or any naturally occurring slope exceeding 25% as measured using 2-foot intervals.
It's fine.
Great,
Great.
great. Perfect. Is there any other definition that anyone wants to talk through? Is there anything missing that anyone really feels strongly should be in there?
Yes, we don't define sawmill. And we have a regulation that permits temporary sawmills.
It's so true. And what makes it temporary has been my burning question.
Well, I don't really understand it myself, but I know that it was a big issue in this town. We have a regulation that allows this entity, and we cannot, later on, I think, Janelle, we as a group removed temporary sawmills from the special permit discussion, and I don't think we should do that without another public hearing and vote. We cannot amend that regulation. It has to stand until we get around to it.
Well,
Does anybody disagree with me?
so would you, I think where something is getting convoluted is these amendments to the regulations, that's going to a public hearing. Any change to a regulation, whether you're crossing
Yeah,
a T or
But
dotting an I.
Janelle, I'm just warning you that later on in these regs, I'm going to bring up that sawmills were omitted in
Didn't we have
this
a
whole.
talk about with Karen, weren't we talking about that's in the farming, definitions of farming?
Yeah.
Right to farm,
Yeah,
And
and that's why we were like, wait a minute, how can we regulate this?
Okay, that's
yeah,
And por-
it was a
and por-
kettle of fish.
it was a big part of a long discussion because we were then saying, well, why are all these particulars in there if we can't even really go there? And because it's also known as a non-conforming use.
I appreciate that clarification. Sorry.
No, it's
I
good to
forgot.
lose cash.
oh, temporary saw, what about portable sawmills are something that, people do set up portable sawmills to build a house, or temporary sawmill to build a house, because they're handcrafting houses. That that has existed and happened in town of Cornwall, and some loggers will, you can bring a portable sawmill in if you want to do some specific stuff, if you really want to. But is that agriculture? Is that part of forestry?
Not
I don't
really.
know. It is, it's pretty much in the definition.
Well, so are we talking about two things here? Are we talking about farming and their legal, legal ability to be able to put up a sawmill? And then we need something for the rest of the town that is involved in farming. So
No,
if
'cause
James,
it is a
James
farming.
wanted,
It is a farming. It's not. You don't have to be a farmer to be farming trees.
so you can
not-
say that any private owner could
Well,
find
it's
himself a
because
farm?
the agriculture definition includes forestry and production of products from trees. So, and those decisions are made by the Commissioner of Agriculture.
I think Bruce, kind of where you might be going, for instance, if someone, and there is a history of a house up on, it's in the Seal Rock subdivision, that a zoning permit was allowed for a portable temporary sawmill for that person to use and mill timber off of his own property to construct a house. And, that was 40 years ago, but there are more people that are talking about it. All I have to do is watch these reality shows that, people who want to create and build their own houses. How do you do that? Could you bring in a portable sawmill if it was to build your house? There's gonna be extenuating circumstances and everything, but sawmills are really part of forestry, and that is agricultural. So it's circumstantial in many cases. And sawmills tend to be noisy, logging trucks coming in, they tend to be, not what a lot of neighborhoods want.
Listen,
You're saying that they're restricted by logging on their own property? Is our farming restricted by logging on their own property?
No, they're not restricted. They can log on their property.
But they can bring in logs from other properties and operate a sawmill in a farm area?
Well, Bruce, the old fashioned way of farming was not everybody had the equipment to do one thing. There was always shared farming. That's, one person had made the fences and one person did other things. That's
if
how
I could,
old fashioned
if I
farming was.
could just mention that on my list of things that we had wanted to come back to in the future and have a more detailed discussion was the whole sawmill piece.
Mm.
So perhaps we could agree to leave what we
Yeah.
have here alone for now. And eventually we'll have a bigger discussion. My list is going to eventually come to all of you. We're going to jointly set our priorities and take everything one at a time. So it's not going to be forgotten. That's all I can say. Let's not spend any more time on it right now.
I have a question, if I may, about another definition, the flag lot definition.
Oh,
Yeah.
I hate that definition.
I've struggled with it.
I was confused by its access by a common access way.
Yeah, and
I
that
thought-
comes from.
Does it have to have a shared access way? I thought it was just a lot that doesn't have the required road frontage, and then it opens up in the back. Well, maybe I'll,
And this is taken from, which is accessed by an access way. This is from an updated definition that's from 2003.
yeah, I see, it's in our regs that our paper copy.
Yeah, and it says a lot which has less than the minimum required lot width on a street and which is accessed by an access way. And this now reads common access way. So do we leave it verbatim?
No, so I think I think we want to get rid of common.
And just leave
Right.
it accessed by an access way.
It's basically a lot that doesn't have the required road, we have like a minimum
Doesn't
dimension.
have the frontage.
The frontage, but it does have an access way. Otherwise, it would be considered a captured or rear lot or whatever those,
Yeah,
a lot that doesn't have any access way, where this has one. It's just,
Well,
it's shaped like a flagpole. That's why they call it a flag lot, where you come in and then the interior space opens up.
But isn't it true that a lot of the time the access way is a common one between the flag lot and the neighboring lot, but not necessarily?
yes,
Actually,
that's
now
more
it's
of
a-
the shared access way, which
It,
by
it's
special,
illegal.
by special, it was under special permits. Shared access way, that it was better to have a shared access way. But flag lots, the access should be owned by the property. It should not be across somebody else's property. And it also should have requirements that it has to comply with anything that at any access way, grade, width for drainage, et cetera. A 50-foot access way to a back lot that sheds water on both sides of the property is not a good situation. Both sides of property owners is not a good situation.
And we actually
problem.
changed our regs, I think back in the 80s, where now we don't allow two flag lots next to each other. And back
Yeah.
then they did. So then they'd have a common access way that was the access way for 2 flag lots, and we don't allow that anymore. So now you can't have 2 flag lots next to each other. You gotta, so you can't really have they don't like you to have a common access.
Common access
way.
way. So in updating that, we will have it read and which is access by an access way and leave it with the 2003 definition. So it will remain
Yeah, that's better.
unchanged. Yeah,
But it's the accessed way, can it be over somebody else's property?
Well, that's,
That's
I
a
think-
right of way.
yeah, I think that's not gonna be within this definition. In access ways, pretty,
a right of way is an access way.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Moving along, it's 8:23. This review is going to take 4 months at this rate.
It's okay, we're going at it, Carrie.
Tearing my hair out.
Maybe you want to change them and have in-person meetings in January and February. And you could get
James will
everything
be
done.
there.
No, I think we need the proper language.
Yeah.
No, this is fine. We're doing a good job.
Does anyone want to get into any other definitions? All points have been really well raised. The other question to the group is anything that's a use that doesn't get defined, and take your time on this question, because that's sort of where, when I first looked at definitions, really pulling a lot of definitions into this section, a lot of it was just uses that don't get defined or things that do get defined in the regulations, but don't get defined up front in any sort of really obvious way. So if there's anything that you come across, especially in uses is a big thing that doesn't get defined. Absolutely. Bring it up, certainly.
I think most of you should have received the document where I commented that this reformatted zoning regulation has 26 or 24 more definitions than the previous one. So I think we got it covered, and we can always add more as we go along through life.
It's so true. This is not set in stone.
Janelle, multifamily is 3 or more. That is
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
What's 2?
Duplex.
yeah. I know.
Um,
And that's so the AHP, that's just from the affordable housing plan, and that's sort of how standard multifamily housing does get defined. Did you have a thought? I think you were.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at another question I had about setback. The definition for setback, minimum distance of a structure may be situated from a boundary line. This lot area forms a buffer from adjacent properties in the public right of way and is located inside the lot. This lot area, I was curious about what that is. This distance?
Yeah, that's a good point. This distance. Yes,
Better.
that's much better, James. See, we need to be on Zoom.
Now, you know, Michelle Ship was a teacher. James, what's your educational background? You mentioned philosophy?
I went to, Cornwall Consolidated School.
Okay.
That was the extent of my English.
Well,
And it was all math, physics, engineering.
did great.
Yeah.
It's engineering that gives you that precision.
Hmm.
Huh, Keith? Now what? Move on.
Move on.
Structure.
Okay.
The structure, we still wanted to keep things like propane tanks, swimming pools.
Karen, that's you. All you.
Generators. Mhm.
We
Mhm.
Oh,
discussed this ad nauseum at the time.
Yes, we did. Yep.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on definitions?
Nope.
Okay, so dimensional requirements, and again, this might end up being in a different order. But the contents is a one pager. I think we can get through this. Because there isn't much,
There's nothing to say about it.
there isn't.
Actually, I would just add feet after minimum front setback, side setback, and rear setback height. Because you have it after the other ones.
I
Feet,
love
feet.
that. Thank you. Yes,
You're remarkable.
I know.
Uh,
Can I just send the draft to you a few days prior to sending it out? And then 15% Matlock coverage, that doesn't get defined. And I'm not going to go into it now, but I just wanted to bring that up because it gets questioned very often as we see lots get more and more developed with this lot coverage, what counts, what doesn't, etc. So we don't have to get into it right now. It's added to your list, Anna.
Okay, I'll add it right now.
And then I added, just for explanatory purposes, in D, where a lot line crosses into another town boundary, the dimensional requirements must be met on the portion of the lot within the town of Cornwall to be considered as a buildable lot within the town of Cornwall. I wanted that to be really clear. I just needed to add that language so that it's known, because there are properties that straddle town boundaries and it can get a little bit tricky.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yes.
And
indeed.
then, the other thing I did want, again, to really bring this change up, when it comes to nonconformities, they can be used and reconstructed in their footprint. But to really keep in mind that expansion of non-conforming uses, extension of non-conforming uses, alterations and like moving them, it's not provided for within our statutory framework, and it's certainly not provided for within case law. So there are some elements in the current regulations that allow for expansion of these nonconformities, and to really bring us back to our foundation, which are our statutes, where that case law and 8-2 is really discouraged. The goal of zoning is conformance and conformity with the regulations as they're written. So opportunities for expanding nonconformities, structures included, just making sure they're allowed to continue, certainly, but not become intensified or enlarged, just to make that really clear.
Mhm.
That's a tricky piece. Nonconformity is the case law list for the state is very lengthy. Then we get into site plan and special permit procedures. I don't want to belabor this because we have in the past, but the one piece that's lingering still, if you all recall, is really when we get to conditioning special permits. I just remember at the end of a long night, we were talking about our approval criteria and also conditions of approval. And this was very much new language and a new ad within the regulations. And I was left with a question mark as to whether or not this is the time for us to go there. It's a pretty big one because it's the evaluation process of applications. And
Well, all of this is true. It's not new. You've just put it all together in one place. It
correct.
seems to me.
Yeah, I mean, conditions were never once, conditions were left really open. They were never sort of enumerated in a way of like, you can condition this and condition that. It really is around the built environment, and relatively straightforward conditions. So it shouldn't be a shock or new to the commission, but it's finally actually put into writing.
I think if I could be James for a second, I would call 6.10 special permit conditions for approval. They have to meet those conditions or we're not going to approve it.
Yeah. I accept that.
We have the right to set conditions, always.
I have a couple things before the,
Before this big question.
yeah, 6.3.
Perfect. I'm going through it with you. Let's go back. 6.3, yes.
It is also recommended that the applicant submit all required information to the land use office at least 1 week in advance.
Oh,
Missing a least.
Yes,
At
great.
least.
At
Six-
least. And this is in italics as well, because this was an ad. It's definitely new commentary.
we made that a policy decision.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
in the past, other commissioners have made the same policy decision. In fact, it's been made over and over again, and apparently nobody ever enforces it. Karen.
Mhm. Yep.
So I guess it's possibly a futile attempt to give Karen time and us.
I'm leaving it in then.
So leave it in.
And did you have anything else on this piece, James?
I had saw 6.4.3.
Great.
I was confused about the wording.
Okay, I like that. 0.4.3, 6.4.3. Yes. The this should actually read 3 should read the applicant, not the application.
Okay,
6.4.3.
Has considered all other applicable requirements, including. Then it says, like, after the chapter 124, applications requiring a wetlands license, no planning and zoning conditions. Is that supposed to be a new paragraph?
No,
Applications requiring a wetlands license, was that then no?
it should be put in parentheses because it's what that section is
next-
called in chapter 124. Does that make sense?
Make sense to everybody else? I don't know, I was a little confused by it.
No, well, I mean, it's just sitting there all by its lonesome. It either has to be struck or it has to be put in parentheses because it's referring to what this 8.3CA is titled applications requiring a wetlands.
Oh,
yeah, that I get that wording it's just awkward.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, maybe even adding italics and then maybe a colon, no planning or zoning commission decision shall be made until a report has been submitted. So that it's very clearly.
so the chapter 124, it just because it's on a new line, I was thinking maybe it was
Got
a
it.
whole different
Yeah.
concept. Sorry about that.
Or
No.
you put it all in a capital A for applications, capital R for
Yes.
requiring, so that it's clear that it's a heading.
Yep, that is what I will do.
And should it be license, a wetland license? What is that?
Actually should be permit,
Right,
The statutes use the term license.
really, okay.
that's weird, yeah.
I just see it in every other town. The word license is used, not permit, actually.
007.
Um,
4.3, 6.5.5.
Great. Hold on, let me just catch up. I'm writing here. Great. 6.5.5.
Oh, that's, I forgot. So these things expire.
Yeah. These things do expire, yes.
What do we do about that?
They
You
have to,
ask for an
Ah.
extension.
or you ask for an extension, or they have to come reapply, because conditions change. The world changes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's not a us thing, that's a statute thing.
And is the time frame up to us though, the 5 years?
That's a
That's-
statute thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's been really wonky for wetlands because of the COVID pandemic. It was very much updated due to the emergency orders, side note, but it has changed over time. And sometimes it's really odd timing. Subdivisions are the same way.
Well, subdivisions don't expire, right?
No, but for them to be substantially complete with construction, the regulations apply at the time of the approval of the subdivision.
I gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, so it gets so tricky with that. It can get tricky.
Mhm.
Karen.
Because those things are usually not followed.
Yeah, it's true. And then yeah, so anything else? I love all the attention to detail and thorough read.
That's as far as I got, so I'm done for the,
These modifications are clear. It's the policy we've been following.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And we did discuss the putting it into writing finally.
Yeah, I think so people can know what to expect.
Exactly.
The example that immediately comes to mind is the fence on the property on Pine Street in Cornwall that we talked about at some length.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was an example. And Karen handled that according to this, and it all worked out just fine.
Yeah, exactly. Do we want to finish on sort of this last bigger question around our approval criteria and the conditions of approval?
I would welcome a movement to accept it as written. Not a movement, a motion. Or we could discuss it first, but I thought we already did. I'll just keep blathering while you all read it.
I know that's the one thing, like, I feel like we might want to give everyone time to sort of read through and go through everything, also juxtaposed to your regulations and give everyone the time necessary, because this is sort of such a grand task. I'm sure there's things I've been staring at for months on end that just like an additional opinion is really helpful, but it's definitely something everyone should take the time to read and reconcile with the existing regulations.
Do we have minimum controls of the amount of water that's needed to build a house on a lot? Is there a minimal amount of water?
That
If you're drilling a well, do you need
that's
2, 3, or 4?
That's
or
all
5
up to
gallons?
Torrington Area Health.
yeah, that would all be our Torrington
It
Area
is.
Health District.
Okay.
Yeah, for wells and sanitary.
That's why they have perk tests done and stuff
Well,
like
that's
that.
not going to tell you how much water you have. So
But even if you don't have enough water, they still have systems for like tanks and stuff. So
They
I
do.
don't, yeah.
Yeah,
Could
they're-
I just
they're
say
expensive.
about these approval criteria and the conditions of approval? What I particularly appreciate about Janelle is she has included these throughout the work she has done for us, such as in the home business regulation, we had paragraphs like this. And what they provide the public with is the reassurance that we are evaluating applications against pre-agreed upon standards. It's not just coming off the tops of our heads. We're not just willy-nilly making decisions. These are the standards that we use. And they have, in fact, been the standards that we use. It's just that nobody has ever written them down before like this. That's how I view all of this.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Okay. Shall we keep going?
Okay,
Pretty close to my
I'm not
bedtime.
hearing anything, so let's go.
I'm fading rapidly.
Okay, so now we're at 8:44. I will accept a motion to adjourn at any point. We obviously need one more meeting to finish our project here. Or we can try to get through permitted uses.
I'm fading fast too, so I'm okay with the
I would
motion.
move to adjourn.
Okay, so we have a motion to adjourn from Keith and a second from Michelle. And now I'm regretting that extra cup of coffee I had so that all in favor say aye.
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 How do I
Any
become a member of the planning and zoning? Serious.
So we have
My
7,
grandfather
8
would really, I wish he was here because he'd have a lot to say about all the hard work you guys do. And my grandfather started planning and zoning in 1953.
Yes,
Wow.
he did. Was it Elmer?
Elmer
was-
Griggs, yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Wow.
I've mentioned that before on this commission. So at that time, it wasn't the planning commission, it was the planning committee of the town of Cornwall. And it didn't become a commission for some time. It existed as separate from any, there was no zoning commission or committee at that time. Anyway, thank you, Richard. We've got 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We did half,
It's subject to change depending upon the order.
right? So I will forward the suggested section progression to you all. We have to also make a decision about that next meeting, and that will be in January. And I will remind you that we have the annual town meeting once again in January, and then maybe we'll be able to set a public forum for February, which I think is very important so that we can give people a chance to have questions answered about why we undertook this and whether we have any nefarious, sneaky ideas that we're trying to,
We also need to make the public more aware of what's going on here, because I'm the only public person, and I had to dig out a big hole to try and figure out how to get on this tonight.
Well, I apologize for that, Richard. I
That's okay.
somehow muffed
Well,
up.
There were a few other people at the beginning, weren't there?
No.
They
Yeah.
rapidly got bored.
Maggie Cooley did tell me she was going to sign in. Did she ever?
I didn't see her.
No. But they can watch the video too, Richard. If you go to your own YouTube channel and you see how many people have signed on to have a look.
Oh, it's very great. It means a lot to me.
Yeah. This is pretty dry and it's pretty boring even for us. So,
Well, was there a motion to approve or is this part of the meeting?
well, there was a motion to
I think we're
adjourn.
discussing.
Motion to adjourn, excuse me.
We're discussing the motion
the
about
meeting is-
adjourning.
The meeting is adjourned at 8:47 PM.
Okay.
You want to chat?
And
Good night,
I'm out of
everybody.
here.
And I
Happy New Year.
appreciate
Yeah.
everybody's participation very much.
It'll be on the website in a little while, I hope.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks,
Thank you.
Richard.
lucky audience.
I know.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah.
Have a safe and happy holiday.
Yep.
Yes.
Hey.